on two of some things that are very dear to me: the founders and our families. Yes, I have a degree in marriage and family, and an undergrad degree in marriage and family studies, but my greatest education came from being a mother. Being a mother to 6 children, I was a young mom. I had 6 children, 8 and under, and I'm almost going to be a grandmother. As of yesterday was her due date, so I'm excited about that. And my husband's a helicopter pilot, and we had to travel all over the country and live in different places and be very mobile. And I did things that I felt I was inspired to do, that God wanted me to do, and often that called me to being a homeschooling mother. And so some of my fondest memories are gathering my children and telling them the stories of this great country and the founding fathers. And some of my most intimate moments came when I studied about the founders and I wept. There is a kinship that I feel, and I'm so grateful for our country and for the sacrifices that they gave us. So here I ask you now, in conjunction with the vision, by raise of hand, how many of you believe that the Constitution will be saved? Nearly every hand goes up, and I'm excited to see that. Because if we are to save this Constitution, we have to rise to the occasion. And so I want to talk about that today. I also want to testify that I do believe that I know God wins. And that because he wins, the sacred document that we call the Constitution will be saved. There's no way that God has given us this great country and that he has provided miracle after miracle throughout the trace of history just to drop it off the cliff at the last moment. It will be saved. To capture this vision, I want to share with you some stories from the Founding Fathers, because I believe that they created the greatest nation on earth. Liberty, the light on the hill. And if we are going to understand how we have become so great, we have to go to the beginning and trace back to figure out where we went wrong. And so with that, I want to tell you a story about Robert Morris. Robert Morris was the financer of the Revolutionary War. One person back then said, if we do not record this in document, our posterity will not believe that one man was responsible for financing the revolution. Anytime George Washington needed money, he went to Robert Morris, and Robert Morris gladly gave it. Robert Morris, his beginning is really similar to ours, and it's important that we understand that, because he was a simple man. He was taught at home. He was home educated, he had a mentor. By the age of 21, he was an entrepreneur and quite wealthy. And with that, he was able to bless this country with his means. In particular, he funded many things, but one in particular was the crossing of the Delaware and the battle and the victory at Trenton. And then he funded the Yorktown, which turned the tide for the Revolutionary War. It was interesting in that time frame that a lot of those people had the choice. Those that had money often refused to loan to Congress. They wanted personal collateral. And so Robert Morris gave himself as a willing man and body to be able to be that person. Then there were other people, business owners, who were so compelled to sell to the British just to line their pockets, while others burned their buildings down so that the British would not get ahead. I ask, what kind of a person would we be? Who would we be in that time frame? Would we be the ones willing to sacrifice? Are we the ones willing to sacrifice today? And that is a key concept. Samuel Adams said this, rebuking reply. If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you, and may chains set lightly upon you. And may posterity forget that you were ever our countrymen. Surely the founders who knew how to show up had a disdain for those who never did. This self-made millionaire, when he gave everything he could in monetary means, eventually he had to succumb to a 5-year sentence in a debtor's jail or debtor's prison. His wife watched their belongings disappear, article after article, until she finally had to go live on a borrowed farm. She watched the mileage with her daughter to visit her husband. 5 years after his sentence was completed, he was able to go home, but he died shortly after. His story is not unique. Many of the founders shared the same story. I would like to take your interest now to the Delaware, the crossing of the Delaware. Most of you know this story. George Washington, against all odds, knew that he had to raise the morale of those men, those 2,400 men that he decided to take, and so he said, we need to strategically figure out how to win this battle, win a battle. So on Christmas night, 1776, there were hurricane winds. The temperatures were 29 to 33 degrees. And they decided to cross the Delaware. We have seen the painting when they're going through the ice chunks. They get to the other side, but that was not the end. These hungry, starving, cold, poorly equipped men had to cross 10 miles to Trenton to do a surprise attack. They were 3 hours behind schedule, and their fate looked bleak. But George Washington guided them. And with prayer and with faith, they took over and they won that battle. How many here have heard of Abraham and Sarah Clark? I've told it a few times. I see one hand go up. I'm going to share this because it goes along with families. Abraham and Sarah Clark, he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And the British gave him a most cruel test, him and his wife. They said, if you will recant your signature on that Declaration of Independence, we will remove your sons from the Jersey ship. It was either one son or two. I need to verify that. So the Jersey ship is known as the death ship. People died on that. They were starved and they were tortured. And so with that, Abraham and Sarah had to decide, do we choose our sons in the comfort of knowing that we saved our sons, or do we choose future prosperity in a free nation? They made the choice to leave their sons there. Could we do the same? With as bleak as that war looked, nearly everything was against them. They were going against the world's most strongest military, who had the money, who had the equipment, and had the training. These were regular men, farmers, that went against this. And we have to ask ourselves, what was the sole source of their victory? Turning our attention back to George Washington, he gave us that. George Washington did pray, as John Johnson pointed out. He did. He knelt and prayed. In fact, we have a recording from a journal, a Quaker, that said, in that woods pointing to a close in view, I heard a plaintive sound, as of a man at prayer. I tied my horse to a sapling and went quietly into the woods. And to my astonishment, I saw that great George Washington on his knees alone, with the sword on one side and his hat cocked on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching to interpose in his divine aid, as he was a crisis, and the cause of this country and humanity and of the world. Such a prayer I have never heard from the lips of a man, and I left him alone praying. I went home and I told my wife, I saw a sight and heard today what I never saw or heard before. We never thought a man could be a soldier and a Christian. But if there was one in the world, it was Washington. We thought it was the cause of God and America could prevail. End quote. It was the faith that supplied the miracles. When we proceed with faith, God then can provide us miracles, but we have to be willing hands. We have to be willing to step out of our comfort zone and do the hard things and make the sacrifices. So let me ask you this. Why were these men willing to do these things, these hard things? May I suggest one thing, one cause? They loved their families. They loved their families presently, and they loved their future families. And they had that vision. I believe that families are the one thing that unite us all. Left, right, bond free, we all want what's best for our families. It is something we all have in common. I believe it drives the universe. When you think about it, we have a God in heaven. He is our Father, and we are his children. He sent us here in families to learn about him and to learn his love for us. Because I know that, I know God will do anything to protect the family, just as we would. And because I know these things, I know God is on our side. Our families are what drives the economy, because it's what causes us to get out of bed and work hard. It's also what drives the educational system, because we send our children there to learn to do the same for their families. So how do we strengthen our families? Because I believe if we strengthen our families, we strengthen a nation. You can tell the health of the nation by the health of its families, and vice versa. May I give you my education that I learned on how to strengthen families? Having family dinner time, learning to worship and think of something higher than yourself. Work. Did you know that working with your family is one of the most satisfactory experiences you can have, and bonding experiences? It's because you're working together, talking, playing, laughing, but also doing something that you can feel satisfaction for. Service. Service is one of the greatest joys that we can have and experience when we help other people. Traditions. It gives your family a sense of belonging, something that your children can connect to and relate to and fall back upon. It gives them a sense of an identity. Recreational activities. We have to balance work and play. And finally, practicing patience, listening, and humility. As I have worked in every system in Utah to try and correct things, my one motivation has been for the love of my family. And the bonus was I gained a love for Utahns and for Americans in general, because we have that one thing in common. We have our families. I want to share something with you that I heard on social media. My grandfather walked 10 miles to work every day, and my father walked 5. I drive a Cadillac, and my son drives a Mercedes, and my grandson will drive a Ferrari. But let me tell you something else. My great-grandson, he will be walking again. Do you know why? Because tough times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men, and weak men create tough times. The message here is that we need to be warriors, and we need to raise warriors. And with that, I suggest that now is the time to rise and be the warriors that we were called to be. Regular people. It's all it takes. Regular people with love. Love moves the world. The world moves for it. It is where God derives his power from. It is love and light and truth. And with that, I want to share with you a story about my daughter who's about ready to have a baby. She was having kind of an identity crisis. And she said, "Mom, I'm so nervous because everything I want to do in life, I kind of have to set aside to be a mom, and now I just kind of need to be a stay-home mom." And I said to her, "Honey, let me tell you something. All the greatest schools and the universities of the world cannot compare to the education you're about to gain." I said, "It is in those quiet moments that I had several diapers to change, and I pled with my father on my knees on how to raise his children, that I developed and found who I was, that I recognized my divinity. Don't ever underestimate the power of a parent, the power of a regular person, and the character that is formed through service." I have said this scenario before. This goes into identity crisis. We need to remember who we are. The lion. Why is he the king of the jungle? He is not the smartest. That might be the elephant or the giraffe. He's not the fastest. That's the cheetah. He's not the tallest. That's the giraffe. So why is the lion the king of the jungle? May I suggest it's because he knows who he is. He commands the respect. When we know who we are, that we are divine creations of God, then we can walk with that confidence, and the world becomes ours, and we become his hands and his servants. Who can stop us when God is for us? I believe that when the founders came together to sign that Declaration of Independence, it was a quiet, sober moment. Those 52 men knew that they were signing away their lives. I read this in a journal, it was years ago. I wish I remembered the names, but I'll tell you what was said. To break the silence, one of the men decided to pull out a joke, and he said to one of the smallest men in the room, "When all of us are hanging for what we have just done, because of your lightness, you'll still be dangling from the noose." And all the gentlemen laughed. Again, what compelled them to do what they did? They had faith. They loved their families. And they had a commitment and allegiance to God. With that, I would like to say and point out that we have been abused by government. And I am here to say that enough is enough. No more are we going to let them blackmail us with a jab for a job, or muzzle our children, or deny us our conscience. No more are we going to let them steal our elections, or tell us that we have nothing to do but listen to them. No more are we going to forget our roles in our proper place. We, the people, will stand. We will stand in our rightful place to take this country back, to restore the Constitution. And we will, by God and through Him, get the job done. I am running for Congress, District 1. I would like to point out Jason here in the front row. He is running in your district, if you're in District 3. We have similar messages. The call has come. We have to rise. Regular people, if you do not like what's happening any more than I have, enough is enough. I have found as I've worked in every system, that's not the system that's the problem, it's the people in the office are, for the most part. We have good senators that are in our presence. But you, as regular people, can rise to the occasion, and you can get the job done. I know that. I know we were born for this day and time and set apart for this purpose. And with that, may we answer the call. In memory of God, family, and country, may we rise to the occasion. Thank you.